The Battle of Tannenberg, 1914, the annihilation of the Russian Second Army. In the opening months of World War I, as Europe was engulfed in a storm of nationalism, alliances, and total war, a titanic clash took place in the dense forests and swamps of East Prussia, a confrontation that would define the first phase of the conflict on the Eastern Front. This was the Battle of Tannenberg, fought between the armies of Imperial Russia and Imperial Germany from August 26th to August 30th, 1914. This was not just a battle of soldiers and generals. It was a battle of intelligence, logistics, pride, and revenge. Outnumbered German forces under the newly appointed command of Paul von Hindenburg and his brilliant chief of staff Erich Ludendorff achieved one of the most astonishing victories in modern military history. Within just 5 days, they surrounded and destroyed the Russian Second Army, capturing more than 90,000 prisoners and effectively erasing one of Russia's major forces from the map. The magnitude of this triumph would shake the morale of the Russian Empire and elevate Hindenburg and Ludendorff to the status of national heroes in Germany, names that would later shape the future of Europe in the years to come. The background: the Eastern Front awakens. When World War I erupted in August 1914, Germany found itself fighting on two fronts, against France and Britain in the west and Russia in the east. The German war plan, known as the Schlieffen Plan, called for a rapid and decisive campaign in the west to crush France before the slow-mobilizing Russian army could fully deploy its forces in the east. However, Russia moved faster than expected. Within weeks of the declaration of war, two massive Russian armies were advancing into East Prussia, threatening the German heartland. The First Army, commanded by General Paul von Rennenkampf, advanced from the northeast. The Second Army, led by General Alexander Samsonov, marched from the south. Their goal was simple yet ambitious: to crush the smaller German Eighth Army between their two forces, secure East Prussia, and then drive west toward Berlin. In theory, the plan seems sound. But in practice, the Russian advance was plagued by disorganization, poor logistics, and disastrous communication. Chaos and miscommunication in the Russian ranks. The Russian armies, although vast in number, suffered from severe structural and technological weaknesses. Many of their troops marched on foot, supply lines were overstretched, and their communication relied heavily on unencrypted radio transmissions. This would prove fatal. The Germans, who had superior signals intelligence, quickly intercepted Russian messages that revealed both troop movements and coordination between the First and Second Armies. These intercepted radio transmissions gave the Germans a priceless advantage. They could now anticipate Russian movements almost in real time. Meanwhile, the relationship between the two Russian commanders was toxic. General Rennenkampf and General Samsonov had clashed years earlier in the Russo-Japanese War and despised each other. This personal rivalry meant that cooperation between their armies was almost impossible. The gap between their advancing forces widened, leaving each vulnerable to isolation, a flaw the Germans would exploit with devastating precision. The German commanders: Hindenburg and Ludendorff. At the start of the war, the German Eighth Army in East Prussia was commanded by General Maximilian von Prittwitz, who panicked when the Russian armies began their invasion. After suffering a setback at Gumbinnen on August 20th, he even suggested retreating behind the Vistula River, abandoning East Prussia altogether. This was unacceptable to the German High Command. Prittwitz was immediately dismissed and replaced by a retired general, Paul von Hindenburg, a calm, calculating veteran known for his organizational discipline. Alongside him was Erich Ludendorff, who had just distinguished himself by capturing the Belgian fortress of Liège earlier that month. The combination of Hindenburg's steady leadership and Ludendorff's audacious strategic mind created a powerful partnership. Yet behind their success stood another critical figure, Colonel Max Hoffmann, a brilliant staff officer who knew the terrain and had studied Russian military patterns in depth. Hoffmann proposed the bold plan that would encircle Samsonov's army. The trap is set. Using intercepted radio messages, the Germans learned that Samsonov's Second Army was advancing through the forests of Masuria, moving north toward Allenstein, modern Olsztyn.
Rennenkampf's First Army, meanwhile, was still far to the east and unlikely to provide any immediate support. The Germans decided to exploit this gap. They shifted their entire 8th Army southward using Germany's efficient railway network, a logistical feat that allowed them to redeploy faster than the Russians could march. By August 26th, the German forces had concentrated their strength against Samsonov's isolated 2nd Army. The Russians, unaware that the Germans had moved in full force, continued their advance. They believed the enemy was retreating when, in fact, the trap was already closing around them.
The battle begins. The first clashes occurred near Ustau and Orlau-Frankenau. The Russian center advanced blindly, while their flanks became dangerously exposed. German divisions struck from the north and southwest, gradually tightening the noose around Samsonov's forces. The terrain itself made the Russian situation worse. Thick forests, lakes, and swamps of East Prussia made communication between corps nearly impossible. Units became separated, supplies ran short, and Russian morale began to falter under relentless German artillery bombardments. By August 28, Ludendorff ordered a massive counteroffensive. The German 17th Corps attacked the Russian left flank, while the 20th Corps moved to cut off their retreat. The Russians, realizing too late that they were surrounded, tried to break through, but the encirclement was complete. The destruction of the Russian Second Army. On August 29-30th, the German forces closed the trap. Samsonov's troops, numbering over 150,000 men, were crushed in one of the most complete encirclements in military history. Cut off from reinforcements, low on ammunition, and without coordination, the Russian divisions disintegrated under German fire. Tens of thousands surrendered, while others tried to flee through the forests and marshes, only to be captured or killed. General Alexander Samsonov, overwhelmed by the catastrophe and the shame of defeat, wandered into the woods near Willenburg. On the night of August 30th, he took his own life with a revolver, unwilling to face Tsar Nicholas II after losing his army. His body was later recovered by German patrols and buried with military honors, a gesture of respect from one professional soldier to another. Aftermath and significance. The victory at Tannenberg was total. The Germans captured over 90,000 prisoners, killed around 30,000, and seized hundreds of artillery pieces and supply wagons. The Russian Second Army ceased to exist. German losses, by contrast, were fewer than 20,000, an astonishing ratio for a battle of such scale. Although Rennenkampf's First Army continued fighting for a few weeks longer, it too was defeated in the subsequent First Battle of the Masurian Lakes in September 1914. By autumn, the entire Russian invasion of East Prussia had been repelled. The Battle of Tannenberg became a symbol of German efficiency, discipline, and technological superiority. It restored morale to the German people at a critical moment when the Western Front was bogging down into trench warfare. Propaganda and legacy. Hindenburg and Ludendorff emerged as national heroes. German newspapers celebrated Tannenberg as a revenge for the medieval defeat at Grunwald, 1410, when the Teutonic Knights were crushed by Polish and Lithuanian forces near the same region. In a symbolic gesture, Hindenburg named the battle after Tannenberg, rather than Allenstein where it actually occurred, framing it as a historical redemption for German pride. A monumental Tannenberg memorial was later built in East Prussia to commemorate the victory. It became both a patriotic shrine and, later, a political symbol, as Hindenburg himself was buried there in 1934, before his remains were moved again during World War II. For Russia, Tannenberg was a humiliation. The loss exposed deep flaws in their command structure, communication systems, and modernization efforts. Though the empire would recover and fight on, the psychological blow of Tannenberg foreshadowed the disintegration of the Tsarist regime that would come just a few years later. Analysis: why the Germans won. Several key factors explain the decisive German victory.
Superior intelligence. The Russians' failure to encrypt radio messages gave the Germans precise knowledge of enemy positions and movements. Rapid mobility via rail. The German army's ability to redeploy entire corps swiftly using railway lines allowed them to outmaneuver the slower Russian forces. Unified command. Hindenburg, Ludendorff, and Hoffmann worked in near-perfect coordination, while Samsonov and Rennenkampf operated independently and even antagonistically. Logistics and terrain. The Germans fought on familiar ground with secure supply lines, while the Russians were deep in hostile territory with long, vulnerable routes of communication. Morale and discipline. The well-trained German troops maintained cohesion under stress, whereas the Russian forces suffered from confusion and declining morale once encircled. Conclusion. A turning point on the Eastern Front. The Battle of Tannenberg stands as one of the most dramatic military victories of the 20th century. In just a few days, Germany turned what could have been a disaster, an invasion of its eastern lands, into a triumph that stunned the world. It showed the lethal power of intelligence, logistics, and decisive command. It also marked the rise of two men, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, who would later play pivotal roles in Germany's wartime and post-war politics. Though the Western Front soon descended into stalemate, the Eastern Front remained fluid, brutal, and vast, a theater where entire armies could vanish into the forests and marshes of history, as Samsonov's had at Tannenberg. The echoes of that August week in 1914 would resonate throughout the First World War and beyond, a haunting reminder that in modern warfare, information and coordination could be just as deadly as bullets and shells.